Right now, sitting in your bookmarks or maybe stacked on your nightstand, you probably have access to more profound theological knowledge and more leadership strategy than the greatest leaders of the early church had in their entire lifetimes.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
I mean, you have the Library of Alexandria right in your pocket.
It is staggering when you really think about it.
It is. So here is the incredibly uncomfortable question we have to start with today. With all of that, why aren't you leading anyone?
Wow. Yeah, that is a jarring question, isn't it?
It really is. Welcome in, everyone. I am talking directly to you today. You know, the person who loves learning, who devours books, who listens to a deep dive like this because you are constantly seeking self-improvement.
Right, because you want to grow. You take notes.
Exactly. But I want us to really confront a challenging reality today. What happens when comfortable learning becomes a hiding place?
A sophisticated hiding place.
Yeah. We treat a library, whether literal or digital, as an arsenal. We think we are arming ourselves for the real world.
But suddenly you look up and you realize all those books, all those sermons, all those insights.
They just become bricks.
Yes, they're bricks. And you've built a fortress that you're hiding behind.
It's the absolute definition of a comfort zone disguised as progress. And it's exactly what we are going to untangle today. We're examining a really insightful manuscript called Sent and Tested.
Yes, sent and tested. It's a highly perceptive text.
And the core mission of this deep dive is to explore this quiet, heavily populated, and mostly ignored gap between simply gathering knowledge and actually taking the responsibility to step out and lead.
To give you a bit of the lay of the land here, the author tackles what they call the shadow phase of leadership.
The shadow phase.
Right. They define this as a prolonged spiritual and practical condition where a person is fully present in their community. I mean, they are informed, they're deeply capable.
Their theology is totally sound.
Exactly. But they perpetually hesitate to step into any kind of commissioning role. They remain in the shadows of the actual leaders, convinced they are just in this extended season of preparation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I think a lot of us, and I am very much including myself in this, might be trapped in this shadow phase without even realizing it.
Oh, it's incredibly common.
Because the trap is that it feels so productive. We think we are just being good students, you know?
We love the dopamine hit of acquiring a new insight.
Right, but there is a massive difference between taking notes and actually taking territory. It's the tension between information saturation and transformation deficiency.
That is the core of the modern dilemma. I mean, we are living in an unprecedented era. A person today can access thousands of sermons within seconds.
Oh, yeah. You can pull up original Greek and Hebrew translations on your phone while you're waiting in line for coffee.
Precisely. Commentaries that were entirely unavailable to past generations are just free online. But the text argues that this absolute abundance has introduced a very subtle danger, which is accumulation without application.
Because it is so easy now to feel spiritually or intellectually active while remaining functionally passive.
Right. You'll listen to 3 deep dives on your commute.
Yeah.
You read a dense book before bed, and your brain says, wow, we really did a lot of growing today.
But the manuscript argues that believers are stalling out. They are stuck in the gap between following and leading.
What's fascinating here is how the author looks to the past to explain this modern condition. They draw a direct parallel to the Israelites in the wilderness.
Oh, I love this comparison.
Think about their context. The Israelites had literally seen the fabric of reality altered. I mean, they saw the plagues. They walked through the parted Red Sea.
They received the law directly from the mountain. They were no longer slaves.
Right. From an information and revelation standpoint, they had it all. They were fully equipped.
They had the ultimate front row seat to divine intervention.
Exactly. But when they stood at the edge of the promised land, they hesitated. They sent spies, they saw giants, and fear completely overshadowed their faith.
Yeah.
Delay replaced movement.
They had all the knowledge of God's power, but they refused the responsibility of the assignment.
And the really tragic part of that story, which the text highlights, is that prolonged hesitation isn't harmless. It's not a neutral waiting room.
No, the wilderness was supposed to be a temporary place of formation,
That's
right? A brief transition.
But because of their hesitation, they turned a classroom into a cemetery. They made it a permanent habitation. And I think that translates so clearly to our knowledge accumulation. Knowledge creates this powerful illusion of maturity.
The illusion of growth. It creates the impression of transformation without actually demanding the evidence of it.
The text points out how insidious this can be. A person can understand the deep theological concept of forgiveness,
Yep.
yet totally refuse to reconcile with their own brother.
Wow. Yeah.
They can teach an eloquent, well-researched lesson on humility, yet fiercely resist any form of personal correction.
Or they can debate the theology of mission and outreach, but actively avoid taking responsibility for the person sitting right next to them.
Exactly. The intellect has sprinted miles ahead, but the lived experience hasn't taken a single step.
But wait, I want to push back on this a little, or at least play devil's advocate here. Isn't thorough preparation a fundamentally good thing?
Well, sure, to an extent.
Because it feels like reading another book or taking another course is just the responsible way to handle a calling. It's like downloading a software update on your computer.
Okay, I see where you go.
You want the whole file to finish downloading before you hit install. You don't want to run an operating system on 50% of the code. That just leads to crashes. So why is waiting to be fully downloaded a bad thing here?
That is a great analogy. But here is where the kingdom of God departs from the logic of a software update. The text explicitly warns against endless preparation, labeling it as a form of disguised disobedience.
Disguised disobedience. That's a heavy phrase.
It is. In software, the code is static until it's executed. But in spiritual formation, the author argues that truth is meant to be embodied, not just stored on a hard drive.
So revelation must become response.
And response must become responsibility.
Mm.
You can't just hoard it. If you are perpetually preparing, you are no longer preparing, you are hiding.
Wow. You're using the endless acquisition of knowledge as a shield.
Exactly. To protect yourself from the vulnerability, the messiness, and the potential failure of actual action.
Endless preparation is disguised disobedience. That hits incredibly hard. It reminds me of the anecdote the text shares about the well-informed but unactivated group.
Oh yes, the Tuesday night Bible study.
Right. It describes this midweek study group filled with young professionals. They have been meeting faithfully for 5 years. They are deeply committed. They dissect original texts. They interpret complex historical contexts.
They debate nuances that most people don't even know exist. They are the absolute epitome of prepared.
Yes, they are essentially a theological think tank. And then the narrative introduces a disruption. A brand new believer joins this group.
And he is eager, he is searching, his life is a bit messy, and he has profound but very basic questions.
Now, the group is polite. They welcome him warmly during their scheduled meeting. But the text hones in on the tragedy that unfolds over the next few months. Not a single member of this highly educated group takes the responsibility to personally disciple him outside of that 90-minute window.
Right. They'll answer his questions in the group setting, but no one invites him to coffee on a Thursday morning.
No one asks how his marriage is doing. No one walks him through the basics of prayer.
Because taking that step moves you from the safety of an intellectual debate into the messy reality of another human's life.
And that's risky.
Very risky.
Very risky.
So weeks pass. The new believer attends, he listens to these high-level debates, but he remains spiritually unsupported in the daily friction of his actual life. And eventually, predictably, he drifts away.
And the absolute kicker of that story is that the group just keeps right on studying.
Yeah, they probably start a new series on the epistles the next week.
Nothing changed for them. They knew exactly what discipleship required. They had all the definitions memorized, but no one stepped out of the shadow phase to take responsibility.
It's sobering.
It really is. And I really want to ask you, the listener, to look at your own life right now. Where are you continually learning but not applying? Where are you sitting in that comfortable circle, analyzing the concepts, but letting the searching person right in front of you drift away because you've convinced yourself you aren't ready to lead them yet?
It forces us to examine our underlying motives. Why do we remain passive? The text makes it clear that the reasons are rarely theological.
Right, you don't need another degree to understand that you should help your neighbor.
The barriers are deeply psychological. We fear failure, we fear looking inadequate, we fear the heavy, unglamorous weight of ongoing responsibility, or, quite frankly, we simply enjoy the low-stakes comfort of anonymity.
We like being the audience because no one critiques the audience, they only critique the person on the stage. But if acquiring more information isn't the trigger that magically pushes us into leadership, if we can't just read one more book and suddenly feel brave, what actually moves us forward?
That is the pivotal question, and it requires us to completely dismantle how we think about qualification. Because if we are waiting to feel ready, we will be waiting in the shadows until we die.
Which means we need to completely redefine readiness and tackle the myth of perfection. The world has a very specific, rigid formula for leadership. It's entirely linear.
It is very linear. The worldly corporate logic dictates that competence breeds confidence, and that confidence gives you the authorization to step into leadership.
Right. You master the skills, you build an airtight resume, you project unshakable certainty, and then you are handed the reins.
You don't put someone in charge until they are proven they know exactly what they're doing. But the text argues that the kingdom of God operates in the exact reverse. It is counterintuitive.
The kingdom logic is reverse.
Yes. In the kingdom, obedience creates experience. That raw, often messy experience slowly matures into competence. And that competence, forged in the fire of doing, eventually leads to confidence.
God doesn't recruit the qualified, he qualifies the called. I know that phrase can sound like a bumper sticker, but when you really sit with it, it completely shatters the myth of readiness.
It really does. It shatters this false, paralyzing belief that you have to resolve all your internal doubts, conquer all your fears, and have a perfect 10-year plan before you can lead someone else.
The author brings out several key biblical figures to prove this, emphasizing that youth, weakness, and profound insecurity do not cancel a calling. Take Jeremiah, for example.
Oh, Jeremiah is a great example. The moment God calls him to be a prophet to the nations, Jeremiah's immediate knee-jerk response is to point to his birth certificate. He claims he is too young, he doesn't know how to speak.
He immediately looks at his own limitations as the deciding factor.
Exactly. But God overrode that limitation. And notice how God overrode it. He didn't send Jeremiah to a 5-year oratorical training camp. He didn't give him a crash course in public speaking or age him up a decade.
Right. He just said, I am with you.
He simply provided the promise of his presence. Do not say, I am only a youth, for to all to whom I send you, you shall go. For I am with you to deliver you. The presence of God, not the perfection of the vessel, is the qualification.
And then there's Gideon. Gideon's story is almost comical if you picture it. He is literally hiding in a wine press, a pit in the ground, trying to thresh wheat so the Midianites don't steal it.
He is completely governed by anxiety.
Yeah. And an angel appears and calls him a mighty man of valor, which had to feel like a joke to Gideon. He immediately starts listing reasons why he is the wrong guy. His clan is the weakest, is the least in his family.
He brings his resume of inadequacy. But God doesn't wait for Gideon to feel bold. God doesn't wait for Gideon to read a self-help book and develop an alpha male mindset.
In fact, as the story progresses, God actively strips away the few resources Gideon does have.
Right. God reduces Gideon's army from tens of thousands down to just 300 men.
Which makes zero strategic sense. I mean, if your commander is already terrified, why would you take away 99% of his troops?
Because God is forcing a shift in dependence. God often reduces our external, visible support so that our internal dependence on him has to increase.
Wow.
If Gideon had won with a massive army, he would have credited his own military readiness. By reducing him to 300 men, God ensured that the victory relied entirely on divine intervention.
So Gideon's story teaches us that feeling deeply afraid doesn't mean you are outside of God's will.
Exactly. The question isn't whether fear exists in your heart. The question is whether fear is sitting in the driver's seat governing your decisions.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though, because it's one thing to feel fear, but let's look at Moses. Moses at the burning bush doesn't just hesitate. He engages in an all-out negotiation.
He really does.
He offers a litany of excuses. First, it's identity insecurity. Who am I to go to Pharaoh? Then it's fear of rejection. What if they don't believe me or listen to my voice? Then he points out a physical limitation, his slow speech.
He throws everything at the wall to see what sticks.
And finally, after God answers every single one of these, Moses literally tells God, "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." So I have to ask, how does the text differentiate between normal human hesitation like Gideon in the winepress and actual disobedience? Because Moses telling God no feels a lot like disobedience.
That is a crucial and deeply nuanced distinction in the manuscript. Hesitation, the text argues, is framed as a completely normal human response to the overwhelming, crushing weight of divine responsibility.
Because it is overwhelming.
Very. When you realize what God is asking, if you aren't a little terrified, you probably don't understand the assignment. Wrestling with God, asking honest questions, feeling inadequate, that is all part of the authentic relational process.
It shows you are taking it seriously.
Right. But the text argues that prolonged, stubborn refusal crosses a line. When Moses flatly says, "Send someone else," the text notes that the anger of the Lord was kindled against him.
Why?
Because Moses had crossed from honest hesitation into a rejection of God's sufficiency. Moses was obsessively measuring himself by his visible human weaknesses. God was measuring Moses by the calling and the divine backing. Prolonged refusal is essentially telling God, my weakness is more powerful than your presence.
Oh, wow. My weakness is more powerful than your presence. That is a terrifying mirror to hold up.
It
It
really is.
means that faith doesn't remove the fear. It just refuses to let fear have the final word. Going back to my software analogy, you don't wait for the fear bug to be patched before you launch. If we wait to feel fearless, we will wait indefinitely.
Exactly. But if we act faithfully while our hands are still shaking, the courage actually grows through the act of obedience itself.
The courage grows through the obedience.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of leadership, it entirely reframes what success even looks like.
Right.
We are so conditioned to view leadership as standing on a stage with a microphone while thousands applaud.
Right, the megachurch model or the corporate CEO model.
But the text has this brilliant, reorienting quote. Success is not how many people follow you. It's how many people you form to lead others.
That completely flips the script. Because if success is just gathering a crowd, then yeah, you better be a polished, fearless, charismatic perfectionist.
You have to perform.
But if success is forming people to lead others, then your vulnerability, your visible dependence on God, your mistakes, and your willingness to step forward despite your obvious fear, that is exactly the model those people need to see.
They don't need a superhero. They need a blueprint for how a normal, flawed person walks with God.
The pressure to be perfect before we lead usually stems from a misplaced, incredibly fragile sense of identity, right?
Precisely. If we are stepping into leadership to prove our worth to the world, to show that we are finally ready, competent, and impressive, we will always feel unready because the human ego is insatiable.
It will always find someone who is better, smarter, or more articulate.
Therefore, the text insists on a non-negotiable prerequisite. We must establish our identity before we receive our assignment.
Identity before assignment. This is the absolute antidote to the performance-driven culture we live in, even within the church. The text lays out this beautiful kingdom order. Before a person is sent, they are known. Before they are commissioned, they are affirmed.
And I love that the author uses the life of Jesus to anchor this.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
The author breaks down the profound theological significance of Jesus' baptism to illustrate this exact sequence. In Matthew 3, before Jesus preaches a single public sermon, before he performs any astonishing miracles, before he even faces the grueling testing in the wilderness, he wades into the Jordan River. He is baptized.
And at that exact moment, the heavens open, and the Father publicly affirms him. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.
I think we read past that so quickly.
Wow.
Affirmation comes before action. He didn't have to heal a leper, walk on water, or feed 5,000 people to earn that statement. The Father was pleased with him simply because of who he was, not what he had produced.
The identity of sonship was secured before the labor of ministry began.
Exactly. And the author argues that this is where so many modern leaders go disastrously wrong. A ministry leader who hasn't learned to live securely as a beloved child will lead like an orphan.
An orphan leader. Tell me more about what that looks like in practice.
Well, an orphan leader is fundamentally driven by scarcity and fear. They operate under the assumption that they are on their own, that love and security must be earned. They are driven by the fear of being overlooked, the fear of losing relevance, or the crippling anxiety of not doing enough.
So what do?
They use their ministry, their leadership, and the people under them as a stage to construct their identity. They are trying to manufacture a sense of worth that they should have received from the Father. A son or daughter, conversely, leads as an expression of the identity they already securely possess.
It's the difference between working for your paycheck and working because you own the company. If you're an orphan, you're an employee. You are constantly hustling to prove you belong in the house,
You're scrubbing the floors, staying late.
hoping the master notices your effort so you don't get kicked out. It's exhausting. But if you're a son or daughter, the house is already yours. Your name is on the deed. You still scrub the floors, you still work incredibly hard, but the motivation has entirely shifted.
You do it out of love, stewardship, and pride for your own home, not out of a desperate fear of eviction.
That is a phenomenal way to picture it. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of the burnout epidemic we are seeing in leadership today, it explains everything.
It really does. Why are so many gifted leaders falling into moral failure, deep depression, or simply walking away? Because performance-driven ministry is a cruel taskmaster.
It constantly asks, am I doing enough? Am I being noticed? Is my platform growing as fast as the leader next door?
This is worldly, capitalist logic superimposed onto the kingdom, falsely equating output with intrinsic worth. The kingdom logic says you are already perfectly accepted in Christ, therefore you are entirely free to serve without the frantic, suffocating need to prove yourself.
The text shares the story of a woman named Leah. To bring this down to eye level, I think so many listeners will relate to Leah. She is described as this incredibly gifted, dependable volunteer at her church.
She's the one everyone goes to.
She always says yes to every request, whether it's leading a small group, organizing a meal train, setting up chairs. Over a few years, her service profile multiplies massively. But inwardly, the text notes, she's growing profoundly resentful, anxious, and chronically irritable.
She feels stretched thin yet entirely empty.
Yes, on the outside, she looks like the model of Christian maturity. But internally, she is starved.
And Leah's breakthrough, as the author details, doesn't come from better time management or reading a book on boundaries. It comes when she sits down and realizes that her endless service was being fueled by a deep-seated fear of being forgotten.
She thought her usefulness was her only currency.
Exactly. She believed that if she stopped producing, if she stopped being the dependable one, she would cease to matter to her community and, subconsciously, to God. Her ministry was a frantic attempt to secure the affirmation that the Father had already freely given her.
Wow.
The author points out that only when Leah stepped back and learned to rest in her secure belovedness, apart from anything she did, could her service become healthy, joyful, and sustainable again.
So, once a leader has that Leah-like breakthrough, once they are secure in their identity as a son or daughter and they aren't leading out of orphan-hearted trauma, God just puts them right on a stage to lead thousands. Right, they're ready.
Not exactly. In fact, the manuscript meticulously outlines that the moment identity is established, God usually takes the leader in the exact opposite direction of a stage. He sends them straight into the wilderness to build their character.
Which moves us into understanding how character is actually constructed. Because God doesn't just build ministries or organizations, he builds people. The text emphasizes this beautiful agricultural metaphor. Public fruit is always, without exception, sustained by private roots.
And if the tree grows too tall before the root system is deep enough, the first strong wind will topple it.
And that root system is forged in the wilderness. We usually think of the wilderness in negative terms. We view it as a punishment, a frustrating delay, or a season where God has put us on a shelf and forgotten about us.
But the text radically reframes the wilderness. It calls it a workshop.
The workshop of the soul.
Yes, it is the specific, intentional place where integrity, humility, and endurance are forged away from the applause of the crowd. The author creates a stark contrast here between true discipleship and the Pharisees.
Oh, the Pharisees are the perfect contrast here.
The Pharisees were brilliant. They knew the text perfectly. They were the ultimate library scholars. But they used their knowledge as a shield to resist actual transformation. Their minds were highly trained, but their inner lives were unyielded and arrogant. True character construction requires absolute yieldedness to the process.
The text breaks down 3 specific pillars of character construction using biblical case studies, and I want to spend some time here because this is so practical. Let's start with the first pillar, integrity, modeled by Joseph.
Joseph's story is wild. He is betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and ends up managing the household of an Egyptian official named Potiphar.
And the text defines integrity here not just as basic moral cleanliness, but as deep structural wholeness.
Wholeness is the key word. It means being the exact same person in different contexts. Think about Joseph's situation when Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him. The text points out that Joseph refuses this sin not because he is afraid of getting caught by a religious accountability group.
He had no community there. He was hundreds of miles from home, completely anonymous, and a slave. He had 0 social accountability.
Yet he refuses out of a deep internalized reverence for God. His integrity wasn't upheld by external pressure, it was upheld by internal wholeness.
And his reward for that integrity is being falsely accused and thrown into a dungeon, which makes the wholeness even more impressive because even in the prison, he maintains it. He doesn't grow bitter.
No, he doesn't become a cynical victim who says, well, I tried to do the right thing and look where he got me, so forget it. He continues to serve faithfully in the darkest, most obscure place imaginable.
That leads directly to the second pillar, humility, modeled by Nehemiah. Before Nehemiah ever built a single physical stone wall around the ruined city of Jerusalem, the tide notes what he did first. He sat down, wept, and knelt in prayer for days.
He led from a physical and spiritual posture of dependence, not ego.
Why is that specific sequence so important for humility?
Because an arrogant, proud leader relies on their own strategic brilliance. They need constant affirmation, and they grow highly defensive and combative when challenged. But a humble leader, like Nehemiah, fundamentally understands that God is the actual source of wisdom and strength.
This humility allows them to serve in total obscurity without feeling slighted.
And it allows them to remain teachable and focused, even when facing the intense mockery and opposition that Nehemiah faced from Sanballat and Tobiah. Humility is what keeps you steady when the crowd turns on you.
And the third pillar is endurance, modeled by the Apostle Paul. The text refers to this, borrowing Eugene Peterson's phrase, as the long obedience in the same direction. Paul's resume of suffering is staggering. Beatings, shipwrecks, stonings, imprisonment, and this mysterious thorn in the flesh.
But he didn't view his bodily weakness or his constant afflictions as a disqualification from leadership. He didn't think, God must be mad at me because my life is hard.
Instead, he viewed his weakness as the very arena, the very stage, for Christ's sustaining power to be visibly displayed to the world.
This raises an incredibly important point about how modern believers view trials. The text highlights James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, which commands believers to count it all joy when they meet trials of various kinds.
This is often deeply misunderstood. It isn't asking for masochism. It isn't asking you to put on a fake smile when you get a terrible medical diagnosis.
It's a profound theological understanding that testing seasons do something that comfort can never do. They expose our hidden motives, they ruthlessly burn away our self-reliance, and they teach us profound, unshakable dependence.
But I want to pause there because that actually makes me really uncomfortable. If I'm honest, what about the messy middle of that process?
The messy middle.
Yeah, it is so easy for us to sit here with our microphones, look back at Joseph ruling Egypt or Paul writing half the New Testament, and see the glorious victory. We read their stories knowing the triumphant ending. But what does that character construction actually feel like when you're in the thick of it? When you are sitting in a literal or metaphorical prison for years, and heaven is just silent.
It feels awful. It feels like frustration, seemingly pointless delay, profound misunderstanding, and crushing pressure. The manuscript is very honest about this reality.
The wilderness feels fundamentally unproductive because we are addicted to craving visible, measurable signs of movement. We want to see the analytics of our growth.
But the author makes a powerful observation. A leader who has never been tested in that dark, unproductive middle might only know how to speak about faith theoretically. They have textbook theology.
But a leader who has been tested, who has survived the messy middle, knows what faith actually feels like when the night is dark and all external support is gone.
Their spiritual authority doesn't come from a seminary degree. It comes from survival, scars, and surrender.
So character isn't just formed passively by enduring suffering. You don't just sit in the rain and magically become a better person. It has to be actively maintained. Because if you don't actively maintain your inner life, that messy middle won't form you. It will just crush you, turn you cynical, and make you bitter.
Exactly. Which brings us to the absolute necessity of the inner life and sustainable resilience. The text emphasizes that emotional and spiritual resilience is non-negotiable for long-term leadership. It addresses the massive theme of burnout.
Burnout is huge right now.
The author argues a point that I think is paradigm shifting. Burnout isn't simply a matter of working too hard, logging too many hours, or having bad time management. Burnout is fundamentally a symptom of a deeper spiritual disorder. It's often rooted in what the text diagnoses as the idolatry of being indispensable.
The idolatry of being indispensable. Let's really look at that. That is when you secretly, perhaps subconsciously believe that if you stop working, if you turn off your phone, if you take a vacation, the whole ministry, family, or organization will collapse. You have essentially made yourself the functional savior of your own world.
It is the ultimate expression of pride disguised as dedicated service. And to combat this insidious idol, a leader must deliberately cultivate robust inner disciplines. The text details 4 specific historic practices that act as an anchor.
Let's walk through them.
First is meditation. In a Christian context, this isn't emptying the mind. It is filling it. It is learning to slowly think God's thoughts after Him, deeply chewing on truth instead of just reacting to the frantic urgency of the world's demands.
Second is scripture engagement. But the text makes a distinction here, right? It's not just reading the word to prep a sermon or lead a study.
Right. It is allowing the word to read you. It is submitting to the text to let it expose your hidden motives and comfort your deep anxieties.
Third is prayer, which the author defines beautifully not as a grocery list of requests, but as the daily intentional surrender of your self-sufficiency.
And fourth is solitude, which is the deliberate act of escaping the constant noise, the notifications, and the demands of the crowd to remember who you are when no one's looking at you.
The manuscript uses Daniel, specifically Daniel chapter 6, as the prime example of this inner life in action. Daniel is a high-ranking official in Babylon, essentially prime minister. He is incredibly busy.
A decree is signed making it illegal, punishable by death in a lion's den, to pray to anyone but the king.
And what does Daniel do? He goes to his room, opens his windows toward Jerusalem, and prays 3 times a day. But the crucial detail is that he prayed as he had done previously.
His courage in the face of death wasn't spontaneous bravery. It was the fruit of a private repetition. He had built the muscle of his inner life in the quiet, so it was ready to carry him in the crisis.
His public resilience was funded by his private discipline. And then the text brings in the theology of the Sabbath, which acts as the capstone of these inner realms. It frames the Sabbath not merely as a day off to catch up on Netflix or mow the lawn.
It frames Sabbath as a profound act of spiritual resistance. By intentionally stopping your work for a full day, you are declaring with your physical body and your calendar, I am not God. The universe does not depend on my exhaustion to keep spinning.
I love the theology of Sabbath. I really do. But practically speaking, when you have people depending on you, employees, children, congregants stopping, it feels incredibly irresponsible. It feels like dropping the ball. It's like you're driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour, and taking a Sabbath feels like taking your hands completely off the steering wheel. You know you need a break, but the car is in motion. If you let go, you're going to crash.
This raises an important question regarding how we truly view our role versus God's role in our assignments. If you feel like taking your hands off the wheel for one day will cause a catastrophic crash, you are operating under the arrogant assumption that you are the engine powering the vehicle.
Right.
The text argues forcefully that God is the one who sustains the work. Rest, therefore, is not a luxury. It is a profound act of trust that God is actually holding the wheel. If a ministry, a project, or a church falls apart simply because the leader took a day to pray and rest, then that entity was built entirely on human endurance, not on God's grace. And it probably needs to fall apart so it can be rebuilt properly.
Ouch. That is a tough pill to swallow, but so necessary. The text shares the story of Ruth to illustrate the devastating cost of ignoring these inner rhythms. Ruth is described as a tired veteran servant who had accumulated years of invisible ministry wounds.
These are the things that don't make the prayer list. Unmet expectations, the sharp sting of being misunderstood by her peers, the profound, quiet grief of pouring years into mentoring people who just walk away without a word.
She never stopped. She just kept working, kept serving, kept leading. But eventually she realized her heart was strained. She was growing cynical, easily angered, and emotionally numb.
Why? Because she never stopped the car to actually process her grief with God. She used continuous labor to anesthetize her pain. And the psychological truth the author highlights is that unprocessed pain always, inevitably, leaks.
It leaks into your relationships, it shapes your tone of voice, it makes your posture rigid, and it deeply flaws your decision-making.
That is why the text insists that true resilience isn't about being an untouchable superhero who never feels pain. It's about being anchored. It requires you to tell the agonizing truth about your wounds to God and to trusted friends, and to build holy, non-negotiable rhythms of recovery.
But here is the reality we have to face. Even with the best Sabbath rhythms, even with a strong, disciplined inner life, leaders are human, and eventually they will stumble, they will fail, sometimes spectacularly.
And how the kingdom of God handles failure is radically entirely different from how the corporate world or the court of public opinion handles it.
In many human systems, failure is a terminal verdict. It goes on your permanent record. It marks the end of your credibility and the termination of your career.
But in the kingdom, the author argues, failure is not a verdict, it is feedback. It is a painful but deeply revealing diagnostic mechanism that exposes our hidden weaknesses, our misplaced confidence, and the unexamined self-serving motives we didn't even know we had.
The text is brilliant here because it outlines 3 very common, very toxic responses to failure that actively prevent us from actually learning that feedback. Let's walk through them. First is shame-based withdrawal.
This is where you fail, and your internal narrative says, I didn't just make a mistake, I'm a mistake, I'm unworthy. So you just quit, isolate yourself, and disappear.
Second is defensive justification. This is the ego's favorite trick. You say, yes, I failed, but it wasn't really my fault. The team didn't support me. The circumstances were impossible. The expectations were unclear. You blame shift to protect your self-image.
And third is cynical hardening. You fail, you get hurt, and you say, well, I tried to lead and got burned, so I will never risk trusting anyone, being vulnerable, or stepping up ever again.
Absolutely. None of those three responses produce spiritual maturity. They only produce isolation, arrogance, or bitterness. Instead, the text points us to the ultimate biblical model of redemptive failure and restoration found in John 21. Peter is the quintessential example here.
Peter didn't just make a minor administrative error or forget a meeting. He publicly, vehemently denied knowing Jesus 3 times during the darkest, most agonizing hour of Christ's life. It was a catastrophic moral, spiritual, and relational failure.
And after the resurrection, what does Peter do? He goes fishing. He returns to his old, safe, familiar life. He engages entirely in shame-based withdrawal. He assumes he is disqualified forever.
But Jesus doesn't let him stay in that boat. The scene on the beach is so powerful. There's a charcoal fire. Jesus cooks him breakfast. He doesn't shame Peter. He doesn't pull out a clipboard and demand a 10-point behavioral modification plan before Peter can re-enter ministry.
He restores him relationally at the exact point of his failure. Jesus asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" addressing the 3 denials. And with each affirmation, Jesus recommissions him, "Feed my sheep."
What is most fascinating to me about this passage, what the author heavily emphasizes, is that Jesus entrusts the precious care of his followers, his sheep, to the very man who just failed him most spectacularly. Why?
The text argues that God often works most powerfully and most safely through leaders who have been broken by their own failure and restored by grace.
Because their leadership authority is no longer rooted in the brittle illusion of their own perfection, but entirely in their experience of God's transforming unmerited grace.
So what does this all mean for us? It sounds almost scandalous. It sounds like the text is implying that a flawless track record might actually make you a significantly worse leader because you completely lack empathy.
If we extrapolate on the psychology of leadership, a leader who has never failed, who has never had to look in the mirror and face their own capacity for ruin, often lacks the necessary compassion for the profound brokenness of others. They lead with rigidity. They lead with a spreadsheet mentality.
The very failure you are carrying right now, the one you think permanently and irrevocably disqualifies you, might actually be the exact refining fire God is using to burn away your suffocating pride. It replaces your arrogant self-reliance with the authentic, trembling dependence needed to actually shepherd vulnerable, messy people.
The story of Mark in the manuscript perfectly illustrates this dynamic. Mark is introduced as this highly driven, incredibly articulate young leader who experienced rapid early success. His church or organization grew fast.
But behind the scenes, fueled by that success, he became controlling. He couldn't delegate, he micromanaged, he became harsh, and eventually he made a series of poor, arrogant decisions that deeply hurt the people around him. He had to step down. He lost his platform.
But here's the redemption. Instead of withdrawing in shame or writing a book defending himself and blaming his board, he repented. He went silent. He submitted to professional counsel and spiritual direction. And years later, he slowly returned to leadership.
But the text notes he didn't return as this dominant, forceful, charismatic personality. He returned as a quieter, deeper, infinitely healthier shepherd who listened more than he spoke. His failure didn't end his calling. It was the exact curriculum required to refine it.
Which brings us to the ultimate culmination of this entire leadership journey. Once you have embraced your secure identity as a beloved child, once you have endured the slow character building of the wilderness, once you have established sustainable, anchoring inner rhythms, and once you have processed your failures redemptively,
You are finally truly ready to step out of the shadows. The library is no longer a hiding place. It is a resource center to help others. This is the activation and multiplication mandate.
because the ultimate goal of all this intense internal formation isn't just to make you a really healthy, self-actualized, highly educated individual who sits alone in a room. The goal is movement. It is shifting from the math of addition to the math of multiplication.
Addition is simply gathering followers around yourself. Multiplication is building and releasing leaders. The Great Commission given by Jesus wasn't to make converts who just sit in a pew, consume sermons, and wait for heaven. It was to make disciples people who are actively trained to become multipliers themselves.
The author uses the parable of the talents in Matthew 25 to drive this mandate home, and it's a sobering application. We all know the story. The master gives talents, resources, knowledge, influence to 3 servants. The first 2 invest and multiply them. But the third servant takes his talent, digs a hole, and hides it in the ground.
Why? Because he was afraid. But he likely disguised his fear to himself as caution, prudence or wisdom. He thought preserving the exact status quo was the definition of faithfulness. He didn't lose the money.
But the master calls him wicked and lazy, because the text is utterly blunt on this point. What is not used for God's purposes is ultimately lost to them. In the kingdom economy, neutrality is essentially resistance.
If you are just hoarding your theological knowledge, your healed wounds, and your profound insights, sitting in the back row taking notes year after year, you are acting exactly like the third servant.
Okay, so the conviction is there, the listener is feeling it, but how do we actually activate? Because go multiply leaders sounds overwhelming. The text doesn't just leave us with guilt. It provides intensely practical, scaled-down steps, starting with small groups and one-on-one discipleship.
It outlines this brilliantly simple four-step mentoring model that takes the mystery out of leadership transfer.
It is a beautifully reproducible model of transferring responsibility. Step 1, I do, you watch. The leader models the behavior, whether it's leading a meeting or praying for someone. Step 2, we do together. They share the responsibility.
Step 3, you do, I support. The mentee takes the lead, and the mentor is just there as a safety net. And finally, step 4, you do, someone else watches. The mentee has now become the mentor to a third person.
You aren't just teaching an abstract concept. You are walking alongside a human being until they're fully capable of walking alongside someone else. It guarantees that the leadership chain doesn't terminate with you.
Okay, let's unpack this. This four-step mentoring model is brilliant because it is exactly how we learn basic life skills. It's exactly like learning to ride a bike. When you're a kid, first you watch your older sibling ride. I do, you watch. You say it's possible.
Then you get on the bike with training wheels, and your parent has their hands on the handlebars, helping you steer. We do together.
Then the training wheels come off, you pedal, and your parent runs behind you holding the back of the seat. You do, I support. And finally, 30 years later, you are running behind your own kid's bike. You do, someone else watches.
It is the most natural human learning progression in the world, but for some reason, we massively overcomplicate it when it comes to spiritual leadership. We think we need a PowerPoint, a 6-week curriculum, and a stage.
We absolutely overcomplicate it. We let the illusion of scale prevent us from doing the micro work of discipleship. The author synthesizes this beautifully through what they call the 3M framework for setting leadership goals. Any activation step you take should be meaningful, measurable, and multiplying.
Meaningful means it actually matters spiritually. It aligns with kingdom values. Measurable means it isn't vague. You can actually track if you're doing it. But multiplying is the linchpin. Does this specific action have the potential to lead to impact beyond the individual in front of you?
The overarching emphasis here is that true leadership almost always begins significantly smaller than you think. It's not launching a massive branded initiative. It's sitting in a noisy coffee shop, opening a Bible with one other searching person and asking, what is God saying to you and how can I help you obey it?
The story of Hannah in the final chapter really brings this down to earth for anyone who still feels paralyzed. Hannah is described as someone who felt unready to lead for years. She was perpetually in the shadow phase. She kept waiting for more training, a clearer calling, more internal confidence. She was hoarding her library.
Until one day, a younger, much newer believer simply walked up to her and asked a very basic question. Could you help me learn how to pray? I don't know how to do it. It wasn't a formal title. No one handed Hannah a microphone. It was just a raw request from someone a few steps behind her.
And her simple, trembling yes to that tiny, completely imperfect moment was the catalyst for everything. She didn't give a master class. She just prayed with her. They started meeting weekly. Then the younger woman brought a friend. Then others joined. That one tiny act of activation sparked massive generational multiplication within their community. Hannah didn't wait to be ready. She got ready by simply obeying the immediate need in front of her.
That is the essence of activation. You finally step out of the shadow phase, not because your fear has magically vanished, but because your willingness to multiply what God has given you finally decisively outweighs your desire to remain comfortable.
If you wait until you have no doubts, no flaws, and perfect theology, you will never step onto the field. The kingdom of God advances through broken, dependent, thoroughly imperfect people who simply say yes to the next small scary step.
This has been such a profound mirror-holding journey today. For everyone listening, we have to stop using preparation as a sophisticated, spiritualized excuse to hide in the shadows of our own libraries. Readiness is not perfection. Readiness is relational obedience. It is about stepping forward with your specific, quirky gifts, your half-healed wounds, your ongoing unanswered questions, and your trembling fear, trusting completely that God actually equips you while you are in motion, not while you are sitting still. I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to really mull over this week, building on everything we've unpacked today. Consider this. What if your deepest, most painful failure, the very mistake you are desperately trying to hide, the thing that makes you feel utterly disqualified from ever leading anyone, what if that is exactly the curriculum God intends to use to heal the next person you are called to lead? You aren't disqualified. You're just finally broken enough to be useful. Those thousands of books and podcasts in your library, they aren't meant to be bricks for a fortress to hide behind. They're meant to be stepping stones to lead someone else out of the dark.
What a thought to end on.
So look around you. Who are you going to intentionally invest in this week? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, but most importantly, step out of the shadows and start leading.